Welcome to the Charon Files. I am your host, Charon, Ferryman of the Dead. What you are about to hear are testimonies, accounts from the living of what moves beyond understanding, of what refuses to be explained. Across the vast expanse of human history, there are places where the veil between what is known and what lies beyond thins. These are often the isolated locales, the wild edges of civilization, where the ancient world still whispers its secrets. It is in such places that humans sometimes stumble upon sights that defy their understanding, beings that move with an unsettling gait, structures that radiate an unseen malice, or creatures whose very existence challenges the natural order. These encounters leave an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that not all things conform to the predictable patterns of life and death. They are testimonies to a darkness that precedes memory, a primal fear that lingers in the quiet places of the world. David, in the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee, recounts an encounter on his family's land, where a decaying animal followed him and his mother's friend, exhibiting unnatural behavior.
When I was in my early 20s, I was staying with my mother's friend. The friend we were with recently died at 85 and was a veteran, and served many years as a marksman in Vietnam, I believe. He told me times and times again how his home was built on a Navajo reservation, himself being a Native American. He had multiple encounters with him and I, the worst being when him and I were outside his house in his 30 to 50 acre land at night. He was carrying a 9mm pistol and a short-barreled lever action in his truck as we rode through his land, making sure his cattle and horses were still there and no predators were in the area. We seen something that we passed off as a deer progressively follow us. Mind you, this was on the outskirts of the Appalachian Mountains in Tennessee, and we seen the said animal follow us, which isn't typical behavior. From around 150 yards to 200 yards, we seen it twitching, and he got out of the truck, leaving the pistol in my hands in case of an emergency, as he taught me how to use it and when to use it. He approached it slowly with the rifle in hand as I turned the brights on. He was 75 at the time. He seen its decaying flesh and realized, as a man who grew up in the woods, that this wasn't right. We had smelled rotten flesh the entire time, but passed it off as prey getting eaten or rotting by a hunt form animals. But this creature started violently shaking, and he ran the fastest I had ever seen him run and got back in the truck as he cocked his rifle and shot at it, and it ran off almost as if it were barely affected. He slammed the truck into drive, floored it as we never quite got the smell to go away. Sometimes when I drive past the place, I still smell it. He also had a Native American, Ghost, that he's seen frequently, along with his past wife. Sometimes when I hike, I smell it, almost like it never went away, and I sort of cried with how scared I was that day and every day after, and I could smell it for weeks on end after, almost as if it never left.
In southern Ohio, passed down by her mother, of a terrifying first impression of their new farmhouse.
I admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman, who always talks way too loud, was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely and still do. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother, Victor. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean house, ugly house, don't like. Scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me. But I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to the stress of the move. Now this house was ramshackle as fuck, and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and, until recently before we moved in, still had a working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100%. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our Pit or Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there and dragged me out of the water himself. Although my mom was confused how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim. She figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. Boss was outside, Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us, crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss starts going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping, every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around and bark at my mother, wait for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her, almost a mile and a half, out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in at least one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing. She rushed over to me and, after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here. Shouting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs, and out with me. She demanded to know what children, and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious, and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said the same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that me being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was flat impossible. She says there is no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery, because whatever the fuck those things were, I really don't think they were children.
From Australia, Jack recalls a chilling encounter in the woodlands during his youth, where an unmoving deer stared at him from the edge of his fire's light.
This happened when I was much younger, so details may be a little shoddy, but honestly I remember it like it was yesterday. I live in Australia and we don't have much woodlands here, besides a few that span on for a couple 100 acres or so, and when I was younger I'd get lost in these woods a lot, and sometimes even sleep in them for a couple days at most, surviving off fish and creek water. I never had any creepy encounters besides this one time. When I was still a child, and just like I do at least once every 2 to 3 years, I had gotten lost in the woods again. I was completely fine during the day as I had eaten an hour prior to realizing I had no fucking idea where I was, so I had the old, ah shit, here we go again moment, and decided to walk around to find some sticks to make a little fire. I knew a lot about outdoor survival as my family went camping a lot, and I watched videos on YouTube all the time since it interested me and I loved the woods. I had set a fire up as it started getting dark and was about to put out my fire before I saw a small deer on the tree line, just nearly out of range of my fire's light. It was staring at me, which gave me some chills, but I just went, ah, a little deer, and I waved to it. The deer scurried off into a bush behind it, and I couldn't see it anymore. Then I heard this really weird noise, like twigs snapping. And all of a sudden, a much larger deer came out of the same bush I just saw the small one jump into. At this point, I knew something was off, so I stood up and stared at the deer as it stared back at me. I was mentally preparing myself for the idea that this thing could run at me. I was a little kid, what the fuck am I supposed to think? The deer started walking a bit towards me, and I backed up a little and crouched down, but as the deer kept getting closer and I kept backing up, I looked down and realized this fucker had a hoof directly in the fire, and wasn't reacting to it at all. This creeped me the fuck out. I mean, its fur was burning, and it was starting to burn its skin, but it just wasn't reacting. I immediately set off bolting, but I heard it coming behind me. Not really running, but fast enough to keep up with my little legs. I came over this small hill and jumped down into a bush to try and hide from it, and that's when it happened. The scariest shit I've ever seen in my entire life. And I remember it so vividly. The deer's silhouette against the moonlight appeared, and as I stared at the deer, it let out this blood-curdling call that I've never heard from another animal before. All of a sudden, the silhouette started caving in on itself. I could hear its bones snapping and flesh ripping, and this thing just kept getting smaller. Then suddenly it got much bigger, and I closed my eyes because I just couldn't watch anymore. When I opened them, there was a man standing where the deer stood, or at least and then started calling out in this creepy, almost distorted voice, "Hello? Hello?" He repeated this for about 10 minutes while I just sat there in silence, refusing to answer whatever the fuck stood just a couple meters above me. The man then just walked off into the trees, and I heard that same awful snapping noise before it eventually faded away. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in that bush the rest of the night, terrified that this thing could still be lurking around the area, waiting for me to appear again. Once the morning came, I walked in a straight line until I reached a road I recognized, and then I ran home. I didn't tell my family about it, as I feared I wouldn't be taken seriously, but I was terrified. I haven't been into the woods since that day, and always stayed home when my family went camping after begging them not to go. I'm 21 now. That incident was 10 to 11 years ago, and I still remember that silhouette and the noise of the bones snapping. I've done tons of research, and my only conclusion to what happened is that I narrowly escaped a Skinwalker. I'm tearing up from fear as I write all of this, remembering that horrific night.
These accounts, from a twitching creature in the mountains to a house deemed mean by a child to a staring deer in the Australian wilds, speak to the persistent presence of the inexplicable. They remind us that even in familiar landscapes, there are things that defy easy categorization. If what you have heard mirrors something you have lived, leave your own account below. Such testimony